You don't wake up tired because you lack discipline. You wake up tired because your morning is designed to drain you. There are people who open their eyes and don't feel rushed. They don't reach for their phone immediately. They don't. Start the day already behind, and from the outside. It looks like they just have more energy, but they don't. They just don't lose it in the first hour. Most mornings don't begin with intention. They begin with reaction, an alarm, a scroll, a flood of information you didn't choose, and before your feet even touch the ground, your mind is already somewhere else, comparing, processing, catching up, so when you say, I don't have energy in the morning, what you really mean is, your energy was already spent, quietly, in small, invisible ways. Here's the part most people miss. Your brain in the first hour after waking up is not neutral, it's highly impressionable. Whatever you feed it first, it treats as important, not because it is, but because it came first, so if the first thing you consume is noise, your day feels noisy, if the first thing you experience is urgency, your day feels rushed, and if the first thing you do is react, you spend the rest of the day trying to catch up. This is why some people seem calmer. Even with the same workload, they don't control their entire day. They just control the beginning of it, and that changes everything. Because your morning isn't just a routine, it's a signal that tells your brain what kind of day this is going to be. Most people send that signal by accident. A few people design it, and that difference doesn't look dramatic, but it compounds. Most people don't ruin their mornings on purpose. It just happens. You wake up, the alarm goes off. Your hand moves almost automatically to the phone, not because you decided to, but because it's the easiest thing to do. A quick check turns into a scroll, messages, news, notifications, bits of other people's lives, entering your mind before your own thoughts even form, and nothing feels wrong in that moment. It feels normal, but something subtle is already happening. Your attention is being fragmented before it ever had a chance to stabilize. So when you finally get out of bed, your mind is already busy. Not focused, just occupied. Then comes the pressure. You remember what you have to do. Tasks start stacking in your head. Some unfinished, some unclear. There's no structure, just a vague sense of I should be doing something. And when everything feels important, nothing feels clear enough to start. So you hesitate. Maybe you sit down. Maybe you open a tab. Maybe you tell yourself you'll start in 5 minutes, but 5 minutes turns into avoidance. Not because you're lazy, but because your brain is overloaded. Without direction, this is where most people mislabel the problem. They think, I lack discipline. I need more motivation. But the truth is quieter than that. Your brain in the morning is in a transition state. It's shifting from rest to alertness. During that window, it's more sensitive to input, more reactive to stimulation, more likely to follow whatever comes first. So when the first thing you introduce is noise, your system speeds up too quickly. Cortisol rises, attention scatters. Your nervous system shifts into a low-level stress mode. Not enough to panic, but enough to make everything feel slightly heavier. And from there, the rest of the day is just a continuation. You don't lose focus all at once. You lose it in fragments. A notification here, a distraction there, a small delay that turns into a pattern. By the time you notice it, you're already behind your own expectations. And that creates a loop. You feel behind, so you rush, so you lose clarity. You lose clarity, so you avoid. And then you blame yourself. But this loop doesn't start with your work. It starts before your day even begins. Not with a lack of effort, but with a system that never gave your mind a stable place to start. The shift doesn't happen when you try harder. It happens when you see the pattern clearly enough that you can't unsee it. For most people, that moment is quiet. You notice that your worst days, don't start with big mistakes. They start with small automatic ones, a scroll, a reaction. A morning that begins without you dot, and then you realize something. Uncomfortable? You've been treating your mornings like time, but they're not time. They're leverage, because the first hour doesn't just pass. It sets direction. There's a principle in behavioral science that explains this. Your brain is constantly predicting what kind of state it should stay in, and it uses early signals to decide that dot, not logic. Patterns dot, so if your morning feels scattered, your brain assumes scattered is normal dot if it feels rushed. Your brain prepares for more rushing, but here's the part that changes. Everything dot, it doesn't take a perfect routine to shift that state. Dot, it only takes one intentional action. Before the world interrupts you, one moment where you are not reacting, where you are choosing, that moment becomes a reference point dot. It tells your brain, this day has structure. And once that signal is sent, your system starts organizing. Around it dot, focus becomes slightly easier. Decisions feel slightly lighter, not because your life changed, but because your starting point did dot. This is where most people get it wrong dot. They try to fix their entire day, but your day is too big to control dot. Your morning isn't. And more specifically, the first few minutes are not dot. So the realization is simple. You don't need more discipline. You need a reliable starting sequence, something small enough to repeat, clear enough to follow, even when you're tired. Because once the beginning is stable, the rest of the day doesn't have to be perfect dot. It just has to continue. Instead of fixing your entire morning, reduce it to something you can't fail. Not a long routine, not 10 habits, just a simple sequence your brain can recognize and repeat dot. Think of it as a reset protocol. 3 steps. Less than 10 minutes dot. Step 1. Create a gap. When you wake up, don't reach for anything. No phone, no input. Just sit or lie still and take a few slow breaths. You're not trying to feel calm. You're creating a pause between sleep and reaction. Even 60 seconds is enough. This is where most mornings go wrong. There's no gap dot, so the brain never stabilizes. It just gets pulled. This small pause fixes that dot. Step 2. Wake the body, not the pressure. You don't need a workout. You need movement. Stretch your arms, roll your neck. Take 10 slow breaths, or stand up and move slightly. Nothing intense. The goal is not performance. It's regulation. You're telling your nervous system, we're awake, but we're not in a rush. That one signal lowers stress before it spikes. Step 3. Set one direction, not a full plan. Not a long to-do list. Just one line. Something simple and human. Today I move slower. Today I focus on one task at a time. Today I don't rush decisions. This gives your brain a filter. Without it, everything feels equally urgent with it. Your mind knows what matters. Now, picture a simple stick figure. It wakes up. It doesn't grab anything. It pauses. Breathes. It stretches slightly. Then it writes one short sentence above its head. And that's it. No complexity. No pressure to be perfect. But that sequence does something most routines fail to do. It creates stability. You're not chasing motivation. You're reducing friction. And because it's small, you can repeat it on tired days. That's what makes it work. Not intensity, but reliability. At first, nothing feels dramatic. You won't wake up tomorrow as a completely different person. You won't suddenly feel unstoppable. In fact, the change is almost easy to miss. You just notice a little less resistance. Mornings feel slightly quieter. Your mind doesn't rush as fast. You don't reach for your phone as automatically. And that small difference carries forward. You start your work with a bit more clarity, not perfect focus, but enough to begin without hesitation. You make fewer impulsive switches. You stay with things just a little longer. And over time, That little longer becomes progress. This is how consistency actually builds, not through intensity, but through reduced friction, because when the start of your day is stable, you don't spend the rest of it recovering. You're not constantly trying to reset your focus. You're not fighting the same internal resistance over and over again. That alone saves energy. And saved energy compounds. You begin to trust your own rhythm, not because you're always motivated, but because you've seen yourself follow through on something small, repeatedly. That changes how you think about yourself. You stop saying, I can't stay consistent, and start seeing, I can start clean. Even on low energy, there's less guilt, less self-negotiation, less need to force yourself into action. Your system carries more of the weight. And that's the real shift. You're no longer depending on how you feel to decide how your day begins. You've removed that variable. So even when the day gets messy, even when things don't go as planned, you still had a stable starting point. And that matters more than people think, because long-term change doesn't come from perfect days. It comes from days that begin just well enough to keep going. Consistency is not about doing more. It's about making it easier to not stop. You don't need a better morning routine. You need a morning that doesn't work against you. Something simple enough that you can follow it even when you're tired, even when you don't feel like it. Because the goal was never to feel perfect. It was to create a starting point that doesn't depend on your mood. Most people are not struggling with their entire day. They're struggling with how their day begins, and when the beginning is unstable, everything after feels heavier than it should. But when the beginning is clear, even just a little, you think better. You move with less friction. You react less and choose a bit more. That's enough. You don't need a complete life reset. Don't need 10 habits. You don't need more pressure. You need a system that holds you steady when your energy doesn't. Because your life doesn't change in one morning. But a different kind of morning, repeated quietly, can change the direction of everything. If you've been stuck in that loop, waking up tired, reacting before thinking, maybe it's not a discipline problem. Maybe it's just your starting point. If this felt familiar, comment system. And if you want to rebuild your days, slowly, clearly, and without forcing it, subscribe.